What I'd recommend for the 3 professionals that are giving feedback this time, there's 2 ways you can really do this. If you want to go, let's say Lindsay is starting and you want to give all of your feedback at once and then move to Sam, or however you want to do it, or if you want to kind of do it as a team, if your feedback styles are similar, and so you can do a little bit each and then keep kind of pumping back and forth between each other. What do you think would be your preference?
Yeah. What are you guys thinking?
Once upon a time, Lindsay was my student. And I trained her as a therapist.
You want Sam?
You should go.
We can start and then, do you want to just kind of like bounce in when you have something to say?
And the others, yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Feels very American Idol.
I know.
That's what I actually thought when you were recording MC. I was like, oh my gosh. The judges are here. Well, first of all, I think you all did a really good job. At the very beginning, with like your hands off to one another, I think that you did that really well. You all spoke very clearly. And you were giving good feedback, so when people were making comments, you were nodding along and then also saying things like, oh, that's really good feedback, or even building on what they had said. And I think that that made it feel really comfortable, and it made it feel like you weren't facilitators, but that you were actually a part of the group. And I think that that carried the whole way through the duration. It didn't feel like you were facilitators, it felt like you were there as peers, as part of the process, and I thought that was really nice. When you were at the whiteboard, Chelsea had connected the 4 contradicting statements, and I thought that that was a really nice visual as well. And also at the whiteboard, when you were writing out all of the different comments about the perfect woman, I felt like we kind of missed that visual of the perfect woman being crossed out and then going to the appearance ideal. And I think that what Alan had said is true. I think that's a really good visual. And so maybe something to be cautious of next time is if you are kind of talking about the perfect woman and how it's an appearance ideal, you might want to, like, in as authentic way possible, pause and be able to kind of really capture that image, because I think it kind of got lost. Yeah.
Just a quick, that was more, I guess, my fault. I wasn't sure when I'm up at the board if I was supposed to speak or not. So I just started connecting, and like I know I was supposed to show the different ones, but I wasn't actually sure if I was supposed to.
Oh yeah, like I said the last time about being an active scribe, yeah, you can be
Okay.
fully engaging.
Okay, I just didn't want to engage her out, but that was, I was wondering that for myself, and you just brought up a good connect with me to ask that
And I
question.
liked when you connected the truth to and drew the question mark, because I think that kind of maybe visually would get people thinking a little bit about the contradictions without actually even having to say it. But again, I think the visual of crossing out the perfect woman and writing an appearance ideal got lost, and I think that that's a part that's important for people to be able to experience.
I have another scribe comment before maybe Sam jumps in some more stuff, but I really liked when instead of saying scribe, somebody just said the person's name going up. I know it says scribe in the script, but if you're paying attention to who that person's going to be, it really kind of makes the group more cohesive, and people don't have designated roles or responsibilities or anything like that, just a general group. So really liked that. And then I think Sophie, when you were scribing, Sophie, you did a really great job kind of engaging back and forth and bringing people in and clarifying. There's a couple like really long explanations, and so you did a really good job of making sure that you captured. I can't really see what you
There's a lot written, so I hope that everything was there.
but making sure that whatever was up there was what that person was saying, so that they knew that they were listening to.
Yeah.
I just forward with Sophie because I liked the describing as well. I put in that you elicited responses, you clarified really well. The other thing I just want to give you a little trick of the trade is someone who also is often up at a whiteboard. Sometimes I can't keep up with all of the responses, so I come up with little short forms, and so I might use arrows for increase or decrease, so up or down, or I might use kind of short form words. So just a little trick of the trade that sometimes that can kind of help you keep up. because I noticed a sense of kind of having everything look really nice. But I'm thinking that like in the end, that's probably not what the focus is that it looks pretty. At the end, it's like, are we capturing everyone's ideas? But I thought you did a great job clarifying, and sometimes the group is really active and sometimes it's hard to keep up. And so it is helpful to kind of come up with a few of those little short forms, just so that you're not writing in full words.
Yeah, I started off with writing them, and then I don't know if you can see, but like on society,
Yeah.
at the last
No.
note, there's that little arrow that's like increased levels. Like I put an arrow, so like I figure that out at the end.
And another part to that, another part to that too, like the other people that are the leaders as well, if you notice that someone's at the board and they're maybe having a hard time keeping up, even trying to slow the pace of the group a little bit, or even summarize it in a fewer words for them, because I know being at the whiteboard, sometimes it can be that pressure of wanting it to be legible first and foremost, but then trying to also capture everyone's comments.
So maybe I'll just give some more general feedback, and then we can keep moving through. I don't know how you folks took notes.
I took notes as we went
took
through.
notes,
on
okay.
the
Yeah,
margins,
yeah, I started differently, and then I ended up writing the script. So, some of the feedback when it was, or some of the conversation when it was really casual, really allowed you to flow into your own sharing and stories. And I forgive me if I'm wrong, I do think that the four of you got more comfortable doing that as we went along. I certainly noticed a difference, and good for you. And I also noticed a difference in your volume, and some of your cadence was awesome. But I think the group probably had an okay time hearing. Sometimes back here in Jisoo, I struggled to hear you. I know that your back was totally against me, but just to know that in case that becomes an issue depending on the space that you're in.
Yeah, it's easy for your voice to kind of just like, when you're talking about dimension, kind of like trail off, but sometimes you can lose a couple of the last words.
I pick up on something you said. I also really liked how the group leaders actually became full participants, and I think that one of the pieces that was most meaningful was that as there were examples being elicited, you gave really authentic, really meaningful examples, and I actually noticed that compared to the first time around where maybe people are feeling a little bit more cautious with which examples to share. I felt like this time around there was like maybe a little bit more willingness to be vulnerable, and I noticed that the leaders actually took that leadership of the vulnerability, and then the group members followed suit. So I really liked that piece that you were willing to share maybe a different example and the ones that we went around, and they also did feel like they were probably a little bit more personal examples, which then I feel like the group followed suit with you.
And that included when we started talking about more present day stuff, because I know we're talking about past childhood experiences, and then we brought the conversation into what's going on for you with your roommates or at home, and I think that allowed the next couple people down the line to think more about present day, so that was really effective. It also showed a tremendous amount of vulnerability in terms of saying, like, I don't get this right all the time. So good on you.
Definitely. If I can make one comment just about kind of the script, I noticed that there were a few times we got a little off script. I noticed that there was also lots of additions, which I think was nice, as Alan said, that it's okay to add but not to take out. But I actually noticed during one part, so instead of saying the appearance ideal, you said ideal appearance, and I think it kind of gets away from the theoretical kind of perspective of what that means. And I think that was just a little maybe tongue twist that happened, and I think that that's probably just gaining familiarity with the materials, yeah. But that was just one piece that I thought, oh, that we might have missed some of the oomph in it when those two words got kind of interchanged with each other.
Picking up from there, in terms of adding words, especially when you were going through the list at the start of kind of those learning objectives, that felt really comfortable, Jisoo. You were like adding and the will also, and instead of just being 1, 2, 3 roboted, I was following along in the script, and it didn't really feel like I was reading the script, so thank you for that. I think there was another piece where we got off script a little bit, which was when, I think a lot of this is to kind of build us up and to look at the positive side of things. And Chelsea, there was a point where you said about being unable to see the positive, unable to look at the appearance ideal, as opposed to being able to look at the appearance ideal. And so that brought the conversation to kind of a negative place, but the subtext wants us to be looking at if you're able to look at the appearance ideal, we're told that we're loved and accepted, and then we gotta break that down again and be like, except not really, that's not really the case. So just paying attention to even those little words to make sure that we get the right intention out of them.
Chelsea, I thought you did a really great job when we were talking about that section, and you did a great job of summarizing it. You also incorporated kind of that sickly look into when we were talking about the photoshopping and things like that. I thought that that was really strong. It was getting the subtext in it, and I thought you did a really great job with that.
Yeah, you kind of ad-libbed, when you said what was written there, you captured everything, you said it in your own words, and it flowed really nicely, and it took you in a really nice way into the next part of the conversation. It seemed really natural the way that it flowed. So you did an awesome job there.
Even when you were reading from the script, you weren't looking at it. I was like, how have you already? It's true, what?
You studied on our lunch break.
Yeah.
And Madeline, I liked in that same part, you actually jumped in with that story about your sister's friend, and it was really authentic, and it fit so nicely in there, and it just had this real nice flow to it. And again, I think that that's that leadership piece, that if you're willing to kind of share those personal examples, it makes other people in the group feel like, oh yeah, I've had something like that happen too, and they're more likely to share that. So it was really seamless. Like it didn't feel planned. I mean, obviously you probably didn't really plan it. You didn't know what we were doing today, but it had that nice flow to it.
I think on that, when we did a lot of the popcorn style stuff, actually it was really helpful. I think my expectation is it was probably helpful to the group. A couple times somebody said, we're gonna just do this popcorn style, or we're gonna go around, just making clear how you're going to elicit responses from folks at the end of those statements. And then it was great when some of you as leaders did offer to be that first person to kind of set the precedent. Yeah, no, it's no big deal. But I think we should also just be careful not to expect that from all of you, so that other people can feel free to go first, and that way there's a bit more democracy to the group as opposed to it just being the leaders that are doing that leading.
I had similar thoughts as well. It's nice if you have like a particularly quiet group that maybe you're starting to notice that they're having a hard time opening up, to be that first person to take that jump and show that you're able to be vulnerable. But then as the group starts to open up, maybe stepping back a bit more so that other participants are maybe having that option to go first.
And Madeline, I noticed when it was a circle one that you actually made the direction instead of kind of looking on either side and you're like, well, okay, who's gonna go? You actually said, let's go in this direction, and I thought that was really appropriately directive. And sometimes when you're leading a group, you do have to be directive and just say, okay, this is what we're doing, and you're gonna go first.
And Sophie, at one point in time, you actually said, we're gonna mix it up and go this way, which was something that Alan had mentioned last time. So I noticed that, and I thought that was good too, because if you're on the right side of you and you're always going to the right, then that person's always gonna have to go first. But it was good that you were willing to switch things up. I thought that was nice.
I think when we do that and we go to one side and then we go to the other, and then naturally it comes back to us, paying attention to kind of how we're saying, yeah, great job, people. Like, I've heard a lot of good answers, but just noticing how you're saying that and making sure that it's, yeah, you're really doing this work really well, and noticing that you mean what you're saying and not just like, okay, now we're off to next, can really close out that conversation in a helpful way.
There was one point in time where it seemed like things were kind of not going off track, But we had spent a lot of time in one particular spot, and I think Sophie, you actually kind of took the reins a little bit and said like, and one last comment and brought it back together so that the group could move on to the next part, which I thought was a nice way of respecting what people were sharing, but also then communicating and move on to the next topic.
Are we gonna talk about other ways to kind of do that?
Yep.
I was also aware too throughout that you all did a good job of, it can almost be instinctual to say the most beautiful, but I noticed that you were all saying kind of the most beautiful according to the ideal. And you linked it back to that ideal to really kind of drive home the fact that it is an unrealistic ideal, as opposed to falling into our normal standards of saying like, oh, she's the prettiest or things like that. You linked it back to the ideal, which I think was really good as well.
Another note about when we do go around the circle, remember as leaders that you have the notes in front of you is that are things that you want to make sure get included. And so if you as a leader are stuck, you can go to those to be like, oh, we're also supposed to be talking about whatever it is that we're talking about in the section, and so that kind of saves the wrap-up conversation for your colleague at the end. And also steers the conversation a little bit more.
I had a few more comments about just style of presentation. Madeline, I thought you had a really nice tone to your voice. There was something just that really flows about your cadence. I found you really easy to listen to. Your volume was excellent, and actually I think you have a great presentation style. So whatever you're doing, keep doing it. And Chelsea, I wanted to say in the section where you were moving on to, like kind of in hindsight, what would I say? I thought you did a really nice kind of job of acknowledging that it's actually really hard to share personal information with a bunch of strangers. And I thought you did a nice job of just acknowledging that. I think you actually said like it's really hard to share this information. And so I think that normalizes that process for the group participants, that this might have been the first time that they've ever talked about some of these things. This might be the first time, when we think about university, we may in fact get a lot of first-year students who are coming to this kind of group. It might be the first time that they've ever even participated in something like that. So I just thought that really captured things for the kinds of individuals that we're going to get to this kind of program, that is helpful to acknowledge.
I have another note. You did a great job paying attention to body language. When at one of the popcorn style feedback, you knew that Tiffany was wanting to get in, but she thought maybe you wanted to move on, and so you gave her the space, and then it allowed for a lot. And I think that really speaks to how productive the circle format is. And so great job at kind of paying attention to where people were going and looking around for more feedback.
And I guess just another general comment, and you kind of touched on it during this as well. I think, Hannah, you had asked about if someone doesn't have an answer, can we open it up to the group? Then also recognizing if someone's having a hard time coming up with something, being able to kind of, we can go to the next person and then come back. Because I know that sometimes we put on the spot to try and come up with a response to something can be hard, and sometimes people learn better at being able to see others and go and process it a little bit longer. So just being aware if you're noticing that in the group and providing people the opportunity to maybe take a break or pass until the next round comes around. Because again, as Sam mentioned, this might be the first time that they're even sharing or starting to challenge some of the ideas and messages. So just being aware of that and picking up on it.
I think it's also okay to have some silence. Like, it's okay to let someone think for a moment. We have such an expectation that we should go, go, go. And the moment we kind of almost like, oh, do you need to move on, actually kind of perpetuates that belief of like, you better have an answer right away or we're moving on. So like, I agree with what you're saying, Lindsay, and I also think it's okay to pause and say like, if you need a minute, it's okay. And then if the person maybe seems like they're struggling, or you're reading their body language, then to suggest, why don't we move on, we can come back to you at the end, or even to ask them, do you need some more time? But letting some silence be there, that we don't have to fill every moment of every time, like that is okay.
And I think there actually was a point in time, I'm seeing my note here now, where there was the question of, have you ever received a negative comment about your weight or shape from your friend's family or dating partner? How did that make you feel? Chelsea, you asked that and there was a long silence. And you kind of just let it happen. And then people started to speak up. So I think that was a good use of silence in that moment, because you were asking people, how did that make you feel? And maybe they needed some time to actually figure out how that made you feel. So I liked that you allow for that silence to happen.
Jisoo, like when you did the fat talk part, I thought you were super engaged. I loved that you actually did take your time. I loved that you didn't feel like you had to boom, 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 boom. I know it might have been a little bit of nerves and also kind of like, which one am I going to say to who? I could tell that the students that you knew, you felt a little bit more comfortable actually kind of just firing one off at them. But I also think that that's like, as you go into these groups and you're not going to necessarily know the students who are participating, I think that it's okay to have that kind of cadence. I think it's okay for things to have that pace to it. But I liked your eye contact. I liked that you called out everyone's names. I thought you had some humor as well. Some of it might have been self-deprecating, but some of it was also that, like, you know, it is a little bit of a strange thing that we would say that to someone, even though people say those kinds of things to themselves. I'm actually impressed that no one in the group just said, like, fuck you, that's rude. I actually swear a lot. So, like, you know, in fairness, there's part of me as the group participants, I'm like, because if someone said those things to me, I'd be like, you're a jerk. I don't want to be friends with you. So I was actually really impressed that everyone was so PC. So, team group participants.
And I know what I think I would think was something else to focus on.
What if you just woke us up?
All of a sudden.
Hopefully no one's offended by that.
I would flip somebody off. So.
Yeah, I was just surprised because I think that that's what I would say to someone, so.
I think that about sums
I
it
don't
up.
know, I'm not sure that I have any more notes.
Great job.
Awesome. So my feedback on the feedback briefly, what I always tell the professionals I'm training is that my worst fear, which you didn't fulfill, and one person had a particularly bad example I always share, but I've encountered a few people who've done only marginally more. I once had a professional in a room who the grand sum of their feedback was, good job. That was it. And I wanted to turn straight to them and be like, bad job. Because that's just, how's that feedback? And I've had other people give maybe one sentence or 2 sentences, and that's obviously feedback. So thank you to all 3 of you for being so detailed and so focused on the various different things, both adherence-based and in terms of style and things like Lindsay, your comments about handoffs and people giving feedback on what folks were sharing, the visuals at the whiteboard, and you talked about that, and things like not always going first, which I echo unless you're prompted to. There are some where we want you to lead with those primary examples, but in other cases, yes, please don't always go first because we want to get other people to share. Jean, your comments on scribing and clarifying, which are important parts of the scribing when you're at the board, the natural flow of the script and how that fell, folks' cadence, speaking with mindfulness of volume. Also your comment, which if there was any confusion for you, Chelsea, it was you changed the meaning of one of the questions because you said unable instead of able. And that would be a situation where one of you, as the other peer leader, you could have just said, oh, I think it says able, because it did change the meaning a little bit. And then your comments as well, Jean, about being clear about how you will elicit responses and the authenticity of the affirmations, which is, well, yeah, I mean, if you say to somebody, great, thanks for sharing. It's kind of like, okay, was it really? Or are you just saying that because it's kind of time to move on? And then Sam, your comments on the layout of the whiteboard, the things that it's okay to add, things that it's not okay to take away, authenticity, leadership, the tone, and acknowledging the pieces about the sharing. Those are all wonderful things that you all touched on. Then I'm just looking back, the other thing I look for is, because I continue to write down all my feedback, is how much of my feedback is actually touched on it. The majority was, so that's great. The additional things, I'll just add my little observations. I think it was probably because we had just come back from lunch and there's that sense of repetition. The list we made for the perfect woman was very short this time. Whereas actually the lists I think you made for the costs were longer. So next time around, I know it'll be the third time, but try and make that first list for the perfect woman a little bit longer. Let me see other things. Chelsea, I liked again how you brought up the sickly piece in terms of the photoshopping. Do remember to, for all of you, that's just a reminder to pause after each question. There were some times where two questions got run together. Handoffs were definitely more natural this time. Obviously in real sessions, you're not going to cut anything down. We're just cutting some things down here for training purposes. You will want to make sure you keep to that 2 hours. In fact, we'll talk a little bit later about how sometimes you may even struggle to keep to the 2 hours. And that's where a lot of this comes in. I echoed, there were some comments on knowing which things are, there are certain things you don't need to go around the circle on. So unless you have a particularly quiet group, if it doesn't prompt you to go around the circle, there's no need to. In fact, that could cause you to run long, so you don't want to do that. And you might be kind of like pulling teeth on some of those questions where there really probably are only 3 responses to give, and you're trying to get 12. Let's see, anything else? Do remember to try and keep things to your personal experience on the verbal challenges. There were a couple of folks that shared things that were third-party experiences, which just doesn't have as much vulnerability in it. And so the popcorning as well, when I mentioned that going around and not necessarily going in the group circle, is that just helps to save time. And the other thing can be, if people are getting very verbose, I think I might have said this morning, once you hear about 3 or 4 responses that match what you're looking for in terms of responses, it can often be okay on those popcorning ones to kind of move on to the next question. And yeah, that's everything I had. So what we're going to do, we are running a little bit behind time still from the slightly late start this morning, so instead of taking a 15-minute break, how about we take 5 minutes so you have time to stretch, get some water, use the washroom, and then when we come back, what we're going to do is transition into about a 20-minute discussion about implementation and what things will look like on your campus beyond tomorrow. And so during that time, you can be snacking, you can be, don't have to be rigidly in the circle, you can be sitting on the floor, stretching, standing. The only thing you cannot be doing is sleeping. I will request that you are awake during that discussion, but it doesn't have to be as formal as the actual session.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, wait, okay. I just want to make sure we did it right, so I'm now eating pizza. Or you're eating no, I'm driving and I'm eating okay. Oh, yes.
Okay, so in terms of implementation, what I will typically do is give you kind of our standard spiel on what we know typically works well for most university campuses and typically does not work well. So there are some things that are kind of givens, there are other things that are kind of flexible. And then what I'll probably do is have, and I'll I'll let Lindsay know this when she comes back into the room as well, but I'll have maybe some of the Waterloo and Guelph folks talk a little bit about what their vision is or has been, or will be, also add. But so certain things, as you saw from this morning, some of the discussion are probably pretty obvious. Like we want you to maintain the integrity of the script and follow it. We do updates about once a year to our language. So a huge example of a change in the last couple of years would be appearance ideal. For many years it was thin ideal, and then we started leading more and more diverse trainings. I've now led, I believe, 5 trainings where Caucasian women were in the minority in the room, and a lot of people talked about not buying into the thin ideal per se, but the sad thing is no matter what culture in the world people seem to come from, there's some ideal that has been placed upon women. So by changing to appearance ideal, we've managed to capture almost everybody without taking away from the fact that still a large majority of Western women are kind of implanted in this thin ideal focus. The other things that are kind of a given, as I said, about the group circle importance, and some of you have even commented on that throughout the day. For the peer-led model, we typically encourage you to be in groups of 3 or 4. You can do it with 2. I would never recommend planning on having 2 of you, just because there's more to manage then. I would only ever intend to get one of you maybe is sick or something happens, something comes up in your personal life and you can't make it. Sure, you can still do it with 2. But that could be a case where even planning for 4, especially if it's like the winter cold and flu season, that kind of thing, that you can kind of plan around how to manage that. Then the other given would be the group sizes. So if you go above, typically, so let's say there's 3 of you as peer leaders. The maximum I would recommend having in the group would be about 12 actual new participants for a total of 15 people in the room. If you go above that, firstly you start running out of time. People's sharing is watered down. They just don't get as much ability to share. It's just not as effective. We've heard stories of people not following our advice on this and like, oh, we tried to do a group of 50 people. And it's like, if you had actually done pre-post test measures on that, I bet you wouldn't have found very good effects. So that's an aspect of that we definitely don't recommend doing. Similarly, at the low end of the scale, if you don't have probably 6 new participants in the group, it can get a little awkward because then there's 3 of you and 5 other people, and you kind of seem like this little clique of people coming into the room, and you're almost equal in number to the regular participants. So the ideal is going to be somewhere between 6 and 7 and 10 to 12. So your total, the ideal size of a room is about 9 to 13, 14 people total, including yourselves. So what I'm going to do is pause for a second on those factors and then see if Lindsay, Jean, Sam, or anybody else wants to kind of be on the spot for a second and talk a little bit about, after talking to me, after the initial discussions of setting up the training, any particular vision you've had for what you hope to see at either campus, and then from there I can talk a little bit more about what might work.
I think for Waterloo, we talked about all of us getting together once this training is over to kind of process a little bit, and then also decide on what our next steps are going to look like, because our thoughts were that we would do kind of like a couple pilot runs to get a sense for how it's going. I've also been looking at the way that Ryerson has their programs set up. They have like a page within their student or within their university website where it's actually advertised in an email where you can contact if you're interested in taking part in the program. So our hope is to have something like that set up under the campus wellness heading as well. And then from there, in terms of recruiting students to actually take part in the program, we thought we'd start mostly with referrals through health services to the doctors, through counseling services. We're going to advertise it through the Women's Center as well. But for the first little while, our thought was that we would try and keep it a little bit small for the time being, get some of the kinks out, learn ourselves what we're thinking or seeing is going to work best, and then eventually once also the peers have gotten a chance to facilitate the training to then open it up to the wider community, because we don't really know what it's going to look like necessarily, so almost like a soft opening, and then opening it up a little bit more once we have ran it a couple times and see what it's going to possibly look like. Did you have anything else to add, Sandra? I know that we've been talking about what it would look like here too, and your thoughts.
And we can do a somewhat of a semi-pilot with just pre-health educators and see who's interested out of about 100 pre-health educators who wants to kind of let the people being trained today take charge. And without us in the room, but getting the feedback from them, that's one way of looking at it in the future as well. I have a question about some of the content. I understand that the circle is very interactive. Is there the possibility that certain stages should slightly change with it? So for example, with this piece here, the individual, the campus and society, especially with a nice smaller group, you could put maybe 3 pieces of paper and have them go to each one.
Oh, yeah,
Then
yeah.
they get out of their chairs, they get a little bit of momentum, seeing what other people have written and then adding on to it. I could see that being another strategy to be a bit more successful and not only getting out of the chairs for 2 hours, but also just being a little bit more interactive.
I think so having more spaces spread out, like definitely for training, we just have this little board, but I wouldn't recommend having everybody get out, because then what can happen is that lots of side conversations develop, and then suddenly you're at an hour and 30 minutes and you've only covered 60 minutes of the material. And today it feels long because we've been in chairs for the whole day, whereas the 2 hours usually is pretty succinct.
A little bit of variety in the presentation style.
Yeah, I would, based on everything we've seen happen, like the one time we do get out of the chairs in session 2 tomorrow, you'll see where we go off into little groups. That's actually a big piece of the dynamics of handling that, is you have to get out, and then people struggle to get them back in and to get them back on track. So you will get to see that one time we do get out.
I run 3 groups on campus every single week, and so I think that like students are pretty comfortable sitting in a chair for an hour and a half, 2 hour group that I don't find that they feel fidgety, and actually the groups go by pretty quickly. So I'm imagining, obviously for training purposes, it gets slowed down a bit, but I imagine that you blink and the group is over.
I also do think that I get where you're coming from, Sandra. I'm constantly, anytime I'm presenting to students, it's like we need more different 125,000 ways to interact, because I'm usually working with student leaders who are used to that style of presentation. But I think it's a framing of what this is as not as more of a group, like a support, a service, as opposed to even what I would necessarily call a workshop for our purposes, because otherwise they'll expect games and whatnot forever. At least that's kind of how I'm separating the two. So at Guelph, so a couple things. First of all, the students that are here today are all part of the Wellness Education Center, so they're all our peers currently. Chelsea is a Master's of Applied Nutrition student, and her project is going to be to kind of figure us out. So we are fortunate in that respect that we have somebody here who's going to kind of figure out what our implementation plan is. But a couple things that are possible are that it will likely continue, are that our peers, so most of the peers that are here are part of a team that works on healthy eating, active living, body image, eating disorder stuff already, and so we could continue to pull on that group to implement. In terms of who the audience is, that was my biggest concern when we first chatted. Like, how am I going to find all these students that are going to come to this? The first 15 minutes I was here, I was like, oh, this is easy. Like, I felt so much better. Like, this is not a big deal. I already have thoughts about what those groups look like. We have a couple not sanctioned sororities on our campus that are often looking for work like this, and I think that will be a great opportunity. We have clubs in residence that are really interested in mental health and mental well-being, and so that will be an opportunity. We'll probably promote it along with our workshops, but separately in terms of that you could book this. Another thing I was thinking about, and also just like, these are things that are coming up throughout the day, chatting with Lindsay, is does this become a separate team that we train in advance, and then their 5-hour peers that just do this every week for the course of the academic year? Does it totally change your model? That's fine. Probably Sam and her colleagues in both counseling and accessibility will feed into recruitment, signing people up. Anyways, those are some things that I've had off of my mind.
Yeah, I think from a counselor's perspective, our counseling services is always looking for how we can help filter students to other opportunities other than just one-to-one counseling, because there are just not enough of us compared to how many students are on campus and in need. And I can see this as being a really great kind of step. Yeah, a step where a counselor might flag body image, self-esteem, eating stuff, like, and suddenly it's like, hey, have you heard of? And, you know, almost picturing like promotional material, just literally at ease to be able to say, I think you should consider this, and, you know, some sort of registration process. But I know as a counselor and like my peers in counseling services, we're going to be really excited to refer to this group. And like, I actually do run an eating disorders group, and we run a meal support group on campus as well, and I could see how there might be some pieces that might get filtered from there as well. I also think because we're doing a lot of initiatives in residence as well, I could see a lot of pieces for first-year students.
I'm also wondering if there are classes we have 2 Safe Thursday classes that are an hour and a half each. I don't know how the space looking for extending that might look, but pie in the sky. Possibilities in terms of seminars, first years in particular. Yeah, that's good.
I just had a question for you, Alan, given, and I apologize because I know Lindsay and Jane, you guys have been probably more like in constant communication with you, and I've kind of come in late with the game, but so would you consider this program a population health approach or a targeted approach for those at risk? Because I've kind of heard both, and so and most of our peer health educators are a population health approach, so I just want to be clear, is it about referring those at risk, or is it about changing the culture and the social norm around the ideal?
So it's really both. I would say primarily it is more of a broad population health, with the caveat that it's female identified targeted right now. So it's open to anybody that identifies as females, and then we'll talk about the gender piece a bit more in a second. And I think the first group of people I will encourage you to try and get involved, like I heard training the remaining peer health educators here at Waterloo. That's a great idea of a place to start. But even on a more very, very micro level, your friends, they are going to be great early adopters, because assumably, unless you plan to go back under a rock tonight when you leave here, you know some people that you're going to talk to about this. And so to engage them, and if for any reason there's any discomfort about you leading a session with them, well, you could always refer them to be in a session that you're not the leader leading, if that would feel at all awkward. But that's a great group of early adopters. In terms of referring people in, so one thing we try to do with this program, and I'm sure I've talked to, I think it was Lindsay, and we talked on the phone, right? a few
You
months
and
ago.
Melanie.
Melanie. and-
Yep.
yeah. What we would always say is, in terms of who this program is appropriate for, we know that it can help people in sustaining recovery. We know it can reduce eating disorder risk factors. We know it's good for folks who are in the less acute stages of an eating disorder as well. This can be really helpful for them. The only folks we would advise against, and this is why we don't do it in treatment settings, for example, where I work, is somebody who's in a really bad place with an eating disorder, to the point that they probably shouldn't even be enrolled in university at the moment. They should probably be in hospital. Those folks are probably going to struggle with this material. Their cognition is in a whole different place, and they're not ready to explore baseline body image. They probably have trauma and all sorts of other things they are trying to unpack that is their primary focus. So those would be the only group in that area you wouldn't recommend referring in. And then in terms of who you're going to target, anybody there's two groups we recommend not targeting. That doesn't mean you have to exclude them, we just don't want you to target them. One is males, so we don't want you to go shouting from the rooftops to get males into this. But as Lindsay's question this morning, if you have males that come forward with organic interests and are kind of knocking on the door and saying, I want to be a part of this, you don't need to exclude them. We just recommend limiting them to 1 or 2 with a literal limit on 2 per session. That's what we found from particularly trainings, what we can have without it skewing things that females hold back or it changes the gender dynamic too much. Yeah.
Is there a limit to group size in general?
Yeah, I said about 15 or 16. So yeah, that way you're getting only a minor amount. And once the male is okay with being open-minded and sharing from their male experience rather than, the one thing when I do trainings, I always tell males at the beginning, don't be apologists for males. That's not why you're here. You're here to talk about your body, your lived experience. Because that's often what it can become, is kind of like, I'm so sorry I've ever said something like this to a girl in a bar, I did not mean to do it. And it's nice that males are getting that awareness, but that's not the reason. Yeah, Sam?
I find that it's better that if a male does come to a group to try to get another male, like is it helpful that there's 2 males in the group that they have a peer, or do
No,
you
I don't
find
think
that
so. I
the
think-
lone male who's interested does take a lot from the group?
Yeah, I think if they're willing to come into a group knowing that it's primarily females, usually they
You've
get
got to
a
kind
lot
of
out
inform
of it.
that though, that
Yeah.
let them know that you might be the only dude in the room.
Yeah, yeah. If they're okay with that, typically it means they're gonna gel. They have a personality like mine. I've worked now for 13 years with about 95% females, and recently we did some realignment of our building, and I've been put over beside our accounting department, which is 60% male, and it's the first time in my entire working life that the majority of people in an area of the building have been male. It feels weird. This is unusual to me. Then the other group we don't want you to target are varsity female athletes. Simply because we have a better program for that group. So once again, if you have one varsity athlete that comes forward, you don't need to exclude them, have them participate, but don't go to an entire intercollegiate team and offer the program, because what we can do if there's interest at either campus down the road, it's not available for full dissemination yet, but the Female Athlete Body Project is available. And so it does a lot of work looking at contextual body image and breaking down the fact that for many female athletes, you actually have an inside of sport body image and an outside of sport, and those can often do that and just add extra complexity. And then it's typically done in teams, and because of do either Waterloo or Guelph participate in the big American conferences? I know a lot.
We have our own provincial
You
and
do?
national.
Okay, because I know some schools have been
But, yeah.
across Canada, some of them are now going
Some
down
of the, I know
south.
some of the cheerleading teams and things actually do go down to the States and
Okay.
participate in the the big things down
Yeah.
in Florida.
But even at the provincial, like student athletes obviously have, the fact that they're traveling for
Yes.
events, there's all these extra responsibilities they have, so we have found the peer-led model doesn't work as well with them, because they don't have the time. So it usually is led by staff, with the athlete version.
U of G has a pretty significant varsity like presence.
Mhm.
We'd call us a pretty sporty school, if you don't mind me saying that. I could see that there would be potential interest there.
Yep, so if there is interest, kind of get the body project established
Yes,
first, and then if
yeah.
there's interest, shoot me an email. That's exactly, I believe,
Sorry, what's
Ryerson,
it called again? The female?
Female Athlete Body Project, or we call it FAB for short. So, yeah, Ryerson is taking on our first pilot within Canada. I believe they're starting either this fall or in the spring. Colleen's gonna,
Who's your contact at Ryerson?
Colleen Amato.
Okay, thank you.
I will say on the body project front, they have had the challenge, we face a lot in the States as well. It's much more of a challenge to implement in a large urban setting, because then people have so many more things that are going on. Like at Ryerson, you literally walk out the door and the Eaton Center is in front of you, for example, like you're at Young and Dundas. It's like, you have a whole different set of things going on than a campus institution. So their numbers and recruitment have been kind of the struggle we see in a lot of large urban places, whereas here, people have a lot going on, but not as many temptations as city center Toronto, that's for sure.
Has this been adapted for like young girls? Because I think about like early intervention and like setting good habits early. Like, is there anything that's been adapted for like younger?
So we have the full version of the body project, the cognitive dissonance model going all the way down into high school, and then we also have a middle school version that Eric Stice and Paul Roby have been working on, that's ready for some implementation. Needs more people to be willing to pilot, and then really what we have for younger girls goes down to age 7, is our partnership with the World Association of Girl Guides and Girl Scouts and Dove. They have a program called Free Being Me, and it's a little more surface level than going deep diving like this does, but the Free Being Me website has some materials for that. For right now, we don't know of testing of anything below age 7. It's really hard to get down that young to like 4, 5 and be sure you're not doing harm, which is what we're all about.
Do you have recommendations for marketing materials, wording language, how to appropriately sell the
Yep.
program? Is that something that you're going to provide to both?
Yeah, we'll share
institutions?
contacts at other institutions, examples of things other campuses are doing, what's been successful. I do think any incentives you can have to get people in, whether it's if you can get professors to agree to give credit for being involved, if anybody has a budget for like even small gift cards for something, it's amazing how much that helps with recruitment. It's not essential. I think intrinsic motivation is the key thing, but there's no question places that have the most success have some kind of extrinsic factor involved as well. And then in terms of marketing, the key thing coming back to who to recruit, who to not recruit, I think just being really clear about in the marketing about what the program is and what it is not, in that it's a large-scale body image program, that it's not an eating disorder treatment group, it's not a support group, because early days we had, when I was involved, we had people coming into settings who were expecting something drastically different, and that was kind of a little triggering. It's like, oh no, what have I let myself in for? This is not what I was coming here for, so, yeah.
Do you ever serve food or drinks during the group, or do you find that that's too distracting? Like when you're talking about incentives, if you were to say that, maybe someone might get fed, for a university
Yep.
student, that might be attractive, but I also don't know how it fits into the context of the conversation as well, given the
Yep.
topic.
So I answered this a few times in the last year, and what I say is food can be great, but for 2 reasons I would always have the food served at the end. One, it means people will stay till the end, because if you had it out at the beginning, it's like, oh, I'll take the food and now I'll exit out the door, I've got what I really came for. And then the second piece is, let's say you have pizza, for example. If you're sitting talking about volume and eating pizza, that can be a little awkward. Whereas if you have pizza after the session, people are like, F you, I'm eating pizza. I'm allowed to do whatever I want in moderation. Nobody's telling me I can't have pizza. So yeah, it can work just at the
But that can
end.
be that incentive.
Yeah,
But
definitely.
I can see how it would fit in
Yeah.
separately.
Yep.
Okay.
If you haven't already, check out, did you see Ryerson's website?
I have.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay, because they have like a really, I think they've done a really good job in terms of like the brief explanation that they have too. Okay. And then I think there's another link to a website I can provide you that you can Alan can give it with some of the marketing material that
Mhm.
actually has been
Yeah.
done by the Body Project.
I seriously can't remember if I was in on those emails or not.
I can't remember, yeah,
Can you include those with the handout?
sure can.
Is there proprietary stuff in terms of marketing or image or?
No, and then we actually have, I'm gonna turn this off because it's kind of moving from feedback to just brief questions now, but, okay, so how would, you all want to do it kind of the same way as the previous three folks did it? Does that work? Who wants to start?
I can. I just want to acknowledge and remind you, I know you had said the bar was set high this morning, but every session I was listening to, you actively listened to all this feedback and you integrated it, which is very difficult when you're put on the spot. But each time I was impressed, I'm like, oh, they did this, they listened to this, so well done.
And you made it feel new.
Yeah.
I felt like,
Yeah.
oh, this is my first time experiencing this.
And you added on to the conversation each time, so you didn't stick to what was said this morning. And you can tell that we all have a lot of experience and passion for the topic.
I think my one comment, just being in presentations where we make the assumption that everyone understands terminology, I think you all know what cisgender means, but I was actually in a conference 3 years ago that wasn't a common term, and everyone's phones went out and we're looking at it. So just to ensure that, does everyone understand what this is? Presentations, I've been caught doing that too, because someone is afraid to ask, but if people, it's that knowing your audience, and when you're looking at people aren't understanding, just to explain what that means.
Or maybe building on that, if you think it is a term that maybe someone doesn't know, you can reframe it back to say, rather than putting anyone on the spot, saying, does anyone not know what that means? You could say to the person that said it, can you explain to the group what you mean by that, in case there's anyone here that doesn't know what that means? Yeah, I have the same comment with cisgender, because it came up the last one as well. I guess maybe I just went kind of by question, I don't know if, so I'm just going back to some of my notes. So I just have notes, Hannah, when you led the piece about perfect women appearance ideal, I thought you were really natural in your tone, and I thought you did a really good wrap-up summary, and that's what I was also impressed with, like with the three leaders. Like I think it adds when you go around the circle, and then there's a bit of a natural closing to like, okay, like you said this and I heard that, and like so it just doesn't just go right into the next question. So I think that was great. And I think I just wrote maybe using probes every once in a while if there is something that someone says that so someone said the comment, what we think is healthy even if it may not be, and then maybe the point leader could just say like, so can you just clarify what you mean by that, just to give a little bit more context every once in a while if there's a comment. And what else? Yeah, I think so. Tiffany, when you were leading it, I thought there was, when you were talking about have you received negative comments about your weight or shape, and there was that silence, which we talked about, was really good to allow people to think and reflect. And I think you got a couple of responses, and then there was silence again. So I think, again, just reframing the question or asking it again if there is silence wrong, or if you only got one or two responses and you're really looking for a little bit more richness of 4 or 5 responses, you could just repeat it or repeat it in a different way that might help to get that I like how you said, does anyone feel like they're ready to start, rather than saying we're really good, like just changing it up. And good summary and affirming of everyone's comments, as I said as well. I'm trying to think. So Vishali, I've written down that I really liked how you changed between going around the circle and rotating to popcorn style and giving variety, and you probed when there was silence, and you sort of said, is there any other thoughts? Anyone have any other thoughts? I'll let you go for that.
Okay. I thought all three of you did a really good job. I could hear you all clearly, and you did a really good job of enunciating. Michelle, it's been about a year since I've worked with you, and you've come a long way in terms of using a big voice. So that was really, really awesome to see. And I think, Hannah, you did a really great job of being animated. It made me feel like I was hearing the questions for the first time. And Tiffany, I was really surprised because there was the one section at the end where we had not gone through it before, and it asked you to reflect on a personal example, and you just like rolled right through it. You had it ready to go, which was pretty awesome. So I think all three of you did a really great job of moderating and allowing some time for silence, but also probing. Something that I found interesting and was a good learning lesson for me is I found Tiffany and Hannah had slightly different style. I noticed when you were moderating, you were more likely to kind of nod or validate after each response. And Tiffany, you were more likely to stay quiet and wait till the end. And I thought it was really neat to observe, and I feel like I would be more like Hannah, but I actually want to kind of try Tiffany's approach, because what I noticed happening when you were silent and waited till the end is that the group was interacting with each other, and the person that was speaking was looking at everyone in the group rather than responding just to the moderator. So I thought that that was really neat to see. You did a really good job. I think there were a couple times where you made little mistakes or you sat down before you were done and you just kind of rolled with it. There was good humor in the group, which was really awesome. And I think a theme that came out in all of the group discussions this time, which I thought was neat, was the idea of validation. So rather than denying, like, oh, you're not chubby, validating that chubby can still be beautiful, that came out in a few different ways throughout the discussion, and I think that that's an important reminder for all of us when we're going through these exercises. I think there was just one section, and I think this was a reflection of trying to combine some things to save time, but when we were going through this chart, again, I think it was a good learning lesson for me. When you go through each of the three separately, they kind of build on each other, and I think it's more impactful versus when some of the questions are combined or two questions are asked at once, it has less of an impact. And I think, again, that was just a reflection of trying to save some time, but a good reminder to really ask each question separately.
I have a question I want to throw back to the group and to Alan as well, just in terms of how you would delicately do this, because everyone in this room has an interest in being here and probably has a little bit more knowledge because they applied to this in the first place. But we're going to get people that this is not something they've maybe thought about before. So during the fact talk list and when you start to direct a question at someone, so I was even thinking like this one, I'm going to try a new diet, do it with me, you could afford to drop a few, and if the person responds in a way that actually is contradictory to what you're hoping, so if they say, yeah, actually I know I could lose a couple pounds, but you know, you look great, and it's like how would you delicately redirect them so that they've actually not really gotten the point of what you were trying them to do. Like, so I think that could happen. So I'm throwing it back to the group about how you could do that in a way that doesn't point it out or single them out, but you could tell they didn't really get the point of some stuff that was happening.
I'll let you all take a shot at it.
Maybe we can think about it and come back tomorrow because of the time if you want to.
No, I mean, I can provide an answer, but I'd love to see if one of you all wants to give it a shot first.
Based on what you just said, like the first thing that came to my mind is if you had answered that to me, I'd just continue to role play and say something like, oh, well, why you need to lose weight and I need to lose weight. like, and then throw it back to them. And that's specific to what you said. I don't know if they had just said like, but for that, that's probably what I would do, is just try to like reflect it back to them so that they then have to like think about that for a second. But just keep it in the role play so it's less running.
I wonder if we could ask them to try again. Like if there's, because other people in the room might have picked up on, oh, they didn't do it right. And so, like, I think maybe if we continue on with the role play, it might encourage that they did something right. Like I don't know if that's the best way to put it, but I would just maybe say, well, do you want to maybe try that again? So that we can, how would you respond to someone saying that you're trying to, like, that you should lose weight? I don't know. I just feel like maybe putting it out to them again, like, sends a message to everyone in the room that that wasn't the best response. So I'm not sure.
So just like, yeah, sorry. Just affirm the one they gave and maybe ask them to generate another one, like
Yeah.
try, like, not necessarily put down their answer, but like, oh, is there any other responses you could think of that impact them?
Yeah, for sure. Like, I think a gentler way to put it, maybe like, do you think your response, like, is it, like, like, you were very positive towards your friend, but do you feel you were also positive towards yourself?
Or like, yeah, something like affirming, like you were really like positive towards your friend, but then saying like, do you think that that response really challenges the appearance ideal, and like throw it back to that because that's really what we want to get.
Were you gonna say something, Tiffany? I saw your
Oh, no,
hand.
I'm
Okay.
So I think none of the ideas you've said are wrong in any way. I think they can all work. The other thing is, if you don't want to put the person on the spot, as I said, one of the things to be mindful of between session 1 and session 2 is you don't want anybody to feel targeted in any way, and then like, I'm not coming back to session 2, because there's already so many logistical things out in the universe that could make session 2 hard for that person to get to if they were sick or transportation issues or something. So what I think is the other thing you could do in that scenario for session 1 is you can try and ask them if they're willing to try another one, or if they, or maybe reflect back to them, oh, I notice you still kind of reinforce your own weight loss there, or whatever it is. That you could also just take a note of it somewhere in your manual, and then at the end of this session, say that just kind of an acknowledgement of, I saw some people were still struggling to challenge with these. In session 2, we're going to come back and do some of these again, which we do, and we step it up. And then that's really where you could have a note to note that person in session 2. Are they still struggling, or has it kind of taken hold a little more? And if it has, great. And if it hasn't, then tomorrow we will talk about how in session 2 you can probe a little bit more, because hopefully they've come along in the cognitive dissonance process to where they are able to challenge it a little bit more. But if not, you don't lose as much by pushing them a little, because there's no session 3. So you don't have to worry about challenging them a little bit more.
I was just gonna say this peer-to-peer program and the circle aspect of it is really great. And with the presenters being dispersed within the group and not all at the front, so the eyes are always front, that really worked well. Sometimes I have to remind myself who is the person leading and who is the person participating. So the participation from the leaders, even the third time around, was very authentic. And it was like friends hanging out and chatting. So it was I could see why this model was very successful.
So Alan, I have a question for you. Why do we collect the home exercises?
So we'll talk about that in detail tomorrow. About it. A lot of it's about adherence and getting people to be accountable and vulnerable and to do the homework. But we'll talk a little bit more tomorrow about how enforcement of that plays out as such, in that we are going to always encourage people to hand materials in, But if they don't, and we'll talk about what you do with those materials as well if they're handing them in, and some of the different creative ideas people have had around that. But also, if they don't want to hand something in, you're not going to like pry it out of their hands. It's very much an encouraged rather than mandatory idea. Yeah, Tiffany, you have a...
Are we able to mention what we're going to do with them in session one when we mention that? Because I noticed for myself, when we said that we were going to collect them, it made me feel like I wasn't going to be as open and honest and vulnerable with the mirror exercise, because it's something very, very personal to myself, and I don't necessarily want to hand it in for them to read all of the aspects of it.
Yeah, no, we'll talk about this tomorrow, and I'll let you know, for training purposes, we don't collect them, so you won't personally have yours collected tomorrow, so, but, yeah, we'll talk about all the different back and forth pieces and where that turns into theory. Any other feedback anybody has?
My only question, again, also is when it goes from the section where we're doing the things that we're going to commit to doing, and then we all of a sudden go into the home exercises. It's not in the script, but is it worthwhile for the moderator to say, to kind of do a bit of a recap? Okay, you know, we spent the last hour and 45 minutes, we've had some great conversation, we've talked about this, we've talked about that. Like, it just felt kind of, for me, like we moved from this to like, okay, now we're wrapping up and we're like it didn't feel, but there was no fault to the moderators. It was because in the script there's really no like kind of summary and moving on. Transition, that's the right word. Of now we're wrapping up and moving to the home exercises.
Yeah, no, I think one of the ways you can make that segue work a little bit better is one of the comments I was going to have, because we don't prompt it, if you're right, is when you're asking people to say in their own words what the home exercises are. Often somebody will come back and say that the behavioral challenge is also one of them, because it is, and that if they don't, which was what happened this time, if it's just the mirror exercise and the letter that get mentioned, to remind them, oh, and the behavioral challenge as well, because that's, and to say that's really a culmination of everything we've done in session one, is we want you to take these 3 different exercises to practice and put into your real lives what we've talked about today. So you can help make that connection if one of the participants doesn't do it.
So again, that's that piece where it's okay to add things.
Yep.
You just don't want anybody to take anything out of the verbatim of the script, but it's
Yep.
okay to bring your own natural transition of like a summary of here's what we've focused on for the last, hour and 45 minutes.
Yep.
Here's what we're going to work on tonight to build next week.
Yep. Okay, so my feedback on the feedback, I mean, I won't go into too much detail. All of the comments you all are making about things like voice, inflection, animation, preparedness, allowing silence, the affirmations, the structure, you're hitting on all the points we want you as professionals to be hitting on in this process. You're all doing a wonderful job as well. Obviously, at the third group of the day, there's not as much feedback to give, because you're all adopting the feedback, which is wonderful. And so tomorrow we also will flip which professionals go in which order, so that you get a chance to have more to comment on. The only critical things I will note here that weren't kind of gone over is we'll talk more about this tomorrow in the second round of Fat Talk statements, but the goal being to deflect or derail the conversation is really what you're trying to do. So with derailing it, saying something like, how about we go watch a movie, or how about we grab pizza, just kind of completely, if it's appropriate, to not even really acknowledge it, or deflecting, really saying things like, I prefer if we didn't talk about our bodies like that. So there's those 2 ways you can approach it, as well as actually having to deal with it head on. You're still challenging it. Then a couple of other things. When you're that one piece where I interjected, Michelle, I promise that I had lots of positive feedback for you as well. Just the piece where you accidentally got them to, I think that's just a training factor of, because because you knew what was coming ahead. You would just normally get the promise. That it's hard not to run into this problem in training, that you know what's lying ahead, whereas in the regular session that won't happen. And then other things I'll tell you, please do your homework. The letters are one of the most powerful parts of this program. And then as we kind of note in there, doing the mirror exercise, a lot of participants report the closer they can comfortably do it to nudity, the even more they get out of it. So if you have a safe environment, if you live somewhere where you're not like sharing a room or sharing a bathroom with a ton of people, then you can. It definitely is more powerful. The one thing, if any of you have been looking at your schedules, the only thing we didn't get to today because we were running behind and I wanted to be mindful of your time and bring us back to close to ending on time, was we didn't talk about how to deal with challenging participants, so we will talk about that tomorrow. The result could be that tomorrow is a much shorter day. The result could be that we might need to add like 10 or 15 minutes tomorrow. So instead of finishing at 3, we might finish at like 3:15 to get that piece in. The reason tomorrow is so much shorter, apart from the fact we don't want to have you here for as long 2 days, is that the session 2 is a lot easier to condense. Because, for example, about 25-30 minutes the first time around is spent reviewing the letters, and we don't do that same level of review the second and third time around. So you're having almost, for training purposes, almost 25% of the program you're not having to regurgitate the second and third time. So, any final questions or comments before we wrap up for the day?
We're just very impressed with our peers. I think you all did a really awesome job and dove in from the moment that you were here. So I really appreciate that, and it makes me even more excited